You're creating a liability nightmare for this entire transit system. Young lady, step away from that man before I have you arrested. That is what Station Manager Dale Whitfield said 90 seconds before everything changed. The San Antonio train station platform smells like diesel fuel and burned coffee, the kind of bitter tang that coats the back of your throat. Pigeons scatter across concrete as Katie Rodriguez kneels beside the collapsed stranger, her fingers finding his carotid artery with the mechanical precision of someone who has done this under mortar fire. Her scrubs are navy blue beneath a worn canvas jacket, Cedar Creek medical ID badge clipped to her belt, her cover for 3 months of surveillance tracking black market medical supply theft that spirals toward arms dealers. Commuters step around her without slowing, briefcases and rolling luggage flowing past like water around a stone. Nobody stops. Nobody helps. Katie's hands move with practiced confidence. She checks the man's responsiveness with a sternal rub, firm pressure against his breastbone. No reaction. His pupils are blown wide, fixed. She's assessed 17 cardiac arrests in her operational career. This is her 18th. Whitfield appears from the station office, clipboard clutched like a shield, his silk tie the color of old money. He's 48 with the soft belly of a man who hasn't walked more than 50 yards in a decade. His voice rises before he's even close enough to see the patient clearly. Step back. Right now. You need to step away from that passenger. Katie doesn't look up. Her fingers track the carotid pulse, absent, while her other hand presses firmly against the sternum. Assessment. Verification. The second check confirms what the first already knew. There's no pulse, she says quietly. He needs immediate intervention. I don't care if he needs a miracle, you're not a doctor. Whitfield stops 3 feet away, breathing hard as if the walk exhausted him. You're practicing medicine without a license on municipal property, and I'm not having my station turned into a liability circus. We have protocols. We have EMTs for this. Katie's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. Just the muscles tensing at the angle of her jaw. Not a flinch. Not a tremor. Just the smallest signal that her body is restraining something larger beneath the surface. She continues her assessment, checking the man's pupils again, still blown, while Whitfield begins reading from his clipboard as if procedure matters more than the body in front of him. ETA on ambulance is 8 minutes from here. 8 minutes. She says it flat. No question mark. No plea. Just fact meeting authority. That's not your concern. Your concern is stepping away before I call security. Whitfield's voice climbs another octave. Do you understand what happens when a civilian performs emergency medical procedures? Do you have malpractice insurance? Do you even have a medical license? Katie's hands never hesitate. She performs another assessment, her fingertips reading the absence of pulse like braille written in silence. The man's skin is already cooling. No blood pressure. No perfusion. The longer they argue, the longer the neurons die in clusters, a cascade of cell death that can't be reversed. 8 minutes is too long, Katie says. Her voice drops quieter, which somehow makes it sound more absolute. Move. Or call security. But I'm not stopping. Whitfield's face flushes purple. You have no authority here. None. I'm the station manager. I manage this facility, and I am telling you. Helmand Province. 2019. The voice comes from Katie's left. Weathered. Quiet. Edged with the kind of certainty that stops conversations. A man in his 60s kneels across from Katie, opposite the collapsed stranger. He wears a faded Army Ranger jacket, the kind that's been through actual wars, not metaphorical ones. His sleeves are rolled up, forearms scarred white against tanned skin. He's watching Katie's hands with absolute focus, the way a musician watches another musician's technique. You pulled my team leader out of that blown Humvee. Sanjin Valley. I watched you crack his chest right there in the dirt while rounds were still coming in. The ranger's voice cracks slightly. I didn't know your name then. I just knew you saved Lieutenant Morrison's life. Katie's eyes meet his for exactly 1 sharp second. Recognition. Verification. Then her gaze returns to her patient, her hands continuing their assessment without hesitation. Whitfield sputters. What is? Sir, you need to step back, Katie says to Whitfield, her voice carrying a weight it didn't have 5 seconds ago. This man is in full cardiac arrest. I need space. The ranger doesn't move. He watches her with the intensity of someone witnessing a ghost. 12 years I've wondered if you made it out. If you're still, he stops himself. You're still saving people. Compressions, Katie says. Short. Declarative. Medical present tense. I need access to his chest. Now. The ranger shifts immediately, making space. His training recognizes command authority even when it comes from someone wearing scrubs and carrying no rank insignia. Whitfield, by contrast, stands frozen, his clipboard lowering as his brain processes the conversation he just witnessed. I'm calling security, Whitfield finally says, but his voice has lost its conviction. He reaches for his radio. We need security to the main platform. There's an unauthorized person. The ambulance, Katie interrupts. Where's the ambulance? Still ETA 6 minutes out, a woman's voice calls from somewhere in the gathering crowd. Someone has pulled out a phone. Someone else has called 911. The system is moving now, bureaucracy slowly shifting toward the crisis like a cargo ship turning. Katie's hands begin compressions. 30 of them, steady rhythm, the way they teach you, the way she learned doing this in a Humvee while dust and heat and the smell of burning diesel mixed with copper and fear. Her hands move like metronome precision. Like she's done this 1,000 times. Like she's done this yesterday. The sound is discreet. Bodies moving. Rubber-soled shoes on concrete. The wet compression of a sternum. A siren in the distance, still miles away, still too slow. Katie's jaw is locked now. Not from fear. From something else. From the particular kind of focus that comes when you're holding someone's life in your literal hands. The ranger watches her, and his eyes begin to water. Whitfield speaks into his radio, his voice smaller now. Cancel security response. Medical emergency on platform. Ambulance ETA is, he looks at his watch. 6 minutes. Katie doesn't acknowledge him. She counts compressions silently, her rhythm perfect, her breath controlled. 30 compressions. Check pulse. No pulse. Resume compressions. The protocol lives in her muscle memory the way prayers live in old people's mouths. Automatic. Reflexive. Truth spoken through action. The ranger sits perfectly still, watching. Bearing witness. The siren gets closer. 2 minutes now. Then 1. The ambulance pulls up to the platform entrance and paramedics pour out with the controlled urgency of people who've done this 1,000 times, who've seen it succeed maybe 100 times, fail maybe 900. Their eyes find Katie and her patient immediately. We've got him, one of them says. It's not a request. It's a change of custody. Protocol demanding protocols. Katie performs one final compression check. Full cardiac arrest. 8 minutes downtime. No response to sternal rub. Pupils fixed and dilated. She moves back smoothly, clearing space for the paramedics with the kind of efficiency that makes them pause for a half second. Paramedics can recognize advanced training when they see it. She knows exactly what they need to know. She said nothing unnecessary. Whitfield's radio crackles. His hand hovers over it. He's watching Katie now, really watching her, as if seeing her for the first time. As if the conversation about Helmand Province somehow rewrote everything he thought he understood. Thank you, the ranger says quietly. His voice barely carries over the ambulance's machinery and the crowd's murmurs. I never got to say it. I should have said it then. Katie glances at him once. How is he? Morrison. The ranger's face falls. 3 days after you pulled him out. Infection. Sepsis. He made it home to his wife, though. They named their daughter after him. He would have, the ranger stops. Swallows hard. He would have wanted you to know you gave him those 3 days. Some of us don't get 3 days. Katie nods once. No expression. No flinch. No tremor. Just a woman who understands the mathematics of survival, that sometimes 3 days is all you get, and 3 days with your wife is 3 days of grace. The paramedics load the patient into the ambulance. Whitfield still hasn't moved, his clipboard now hanging at his side like a weapon that didn't work. The crowd begins dispersing, the crisis passing into medical professionals' hands, the story already fading into background noise for people checking their phones and catching their trains. But the ranger doesn't leave. He watches Katie with something approaching reverence. And in her messenger bag, at her feet, the pair of worn combat boots, laces frayed, left one stained with blood from another lifetime, sits silent witness to a moment nobody else understood. The ambulance doors close. The siren wails again, pulling away from the platform. Katie stands very still, watching it go, her breathing controlled, her expression locked. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst that life can offer. Whitfield clears his throat. I'll need a statement for the incident report. For liability purposes. No statement, Katie says quietly. She's already looking past him, toward the platform exit. This was off the books. Unauthorized personnel performing emergency intervention. That's what your report says. But that's what the report says, she repeats. Not harsh. Just absolute. But that wasn't the worst part of what was about to happen. The ambulance bay doors slammed open, and Katie's hands never stopped moving. Compressions. 30 chest thrusts, 2 rescue breaths, compressions again. The rhythm was muscle memory written into bone and nerve, and the kind of muscle that only comes from doing it for real, doing it when the stakes were counting down in your chest like a metronome set to dying. Marcus Chen was 24 years old with no medical alert bracelet and a wallet that identified him as someone important enough to be someone's son, but right now he was just a body without a heartbeat, and Katie was the only thing standing between him and the other side. The paramedic, a woman named Chen with 20 years of patches stitched onto her shoulder like merit badges, had yielded space the moment she saw Katie's hand positioning, the angle of her body, the way she'd set up the assessment at the train station platform with the precision of someone who'd done this when precision was the difference between a soldier living and a soldier being zipped into a bag. You're trained, the paramedic had said, not asked. Katie had rattled off vitals in clipped medical shorthand, pulse thready, pupils dilated, skin cool and clammy, respiratory distress, timeline from collapse to compressions 40 seconds. That was all the paramedic needed. That was all anyone needed if they knew what they were looking at. Whitfield had screamed something about liability from the platform as the ambulance doors closed, his voice cutting off like a radio switched off mid-broadcast. Katie hadn't looked back. The sirens had wailed, a sound like nothing else in the world, urgent, mechanical, the audio version of a second-hand spinning faster, and the ambulance had pulled into Cedar Creek Medical's trauma bay 12 minutes later with Marcus Chen still unresponsive and Katie still pressing down, 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 her arms locked straight, her weight driving compressions at the precise depth and rate that kept oxygen moving through a body that had stopped doing it on its own. The trauma team met them at the bay doors. A resident named Ortiz with a surgical mask and eyes that had seen enough to know not to ask questions. A nurse with a defibrillator already prepped. The paramour shouted hand off, 24-year-old male, witnessed collapse, unresponsive, no medical history, CPR in progress 47 minutes, and the team moved with the fluid precision of apex predators, each person knowing their role, each movement economical and exact. Katie stepped back as they transferred Marcus from the ambulance stretcher to the hospital gurney, her hand still in position, her breathing still measured, her eyes tracking the monitor screen where the flat line waited for a miracle or medication or the right shock at the right moment. We've got him, Ortiz said. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a statement of fact. The trauma team had the patient now. Katie's job was finished. She stepped into the waiting room and sat in one of those plastic chairs bolted to the floor, the kind that couldn't be moved and wouldn't break and probably smelled like every anxious person who'd ever sat in one, wondering if their loved one was going to make it back out through those ER doors alive or in a body bag. Her burner phone buzzed inside her jacket pocket. She didn't pull it out, not yet. She already knew what it would say. The message was as predictable as medication interactions, as inevitable as the next breath: mission status. Katie stared at the ER doors for another 2 minutes before reaching into her pocket. Her handler was in a secure room somewhere, probably Fort Sam Houston, probably with 3 monitors and a coffee cup and the kind of stress that came from running operatives in the field. Katie had been embedded at Cedar Creek Medical for 3 months, 91 days, technically, which meant she'd been here through the summer heat that made San Antonio feel like it was broiling in its own oven, through the pharmaceutical delivery schedules, through the supply chain discrepancies that didn't add up, the missing anesthetics and surgical equipment being siphoned off into black market channels with ties to arms dealers operating out of Sayud Acuna across the border. Marcus Chen had collapsed exactly 52 yards from her surveillance position. That was pure coincidence. That was the universe being funny in the way it sometimes was, dropping a genuine medical emergency directly into her lap while she was watching for something else entirely. But now hospital administration knew her face. Transit Authority had her name from Whitfield's incident report. And Whitfield was already making phone calls. She typed, "Cover intact. Patient stable." The words appeared on the screen of a phone that didn't technically exist in any database, that couldn't be traced, that would burst into cascading digital failure the moment she pressed the destruct sequence she'd memorized months ago. The lie tasted like copper. Within 2 hours of settling into that plastic chair, a hospital administrator found her, a woman named Patterson, with a clipboard and the exhausted expression of someone who'd already navigated 3 crises before noon. "Why," Patterson said, sitting across from her with the kind of professional distance that meant this was an official conversation, "was an unlicensed civilian performing emergency interventions in our facility." Katie didn't answer immediately. Composure was everything. Composure was the discipline that came from years of operations where showing emotion was the same as showing weakness, and showing weakness got people killed. She breathed in through her nose, the sharp antiseptic smell of the hospital mixing with something else, something like fear and adrenaline that clung to the walls of waiting rooms everywhere, and met Patterson's eyes with the kind of steady gaze that didn't apologize or explain. "The patient was stable when I transferred care," Katie said finally. "His vitals were responding. Heart rate climbing back to normal range." "That's not what I asked." Patterson's pen hovered over her clipboard. "Are you a nurse?" Katie didn't lie. That was rule 1. In operations, lying got tangled, got discovered, got people exposed. The truth, carefully shaped, carefully timed, carefully delivered, that was the thing that held up under scrutiny. No. Medical training of any kind. Yes. That was true. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez had medical training that would make most physicians weep. 12 years. 3 tours. Field medicine in places where there was no time for bedside manner, only the requirement that you kept someone alive long enough to get them to someone else who could help. Patterson waited, pen poised, for Katie to elaborate. Katie didn't. "Mr. Chen, the patient's father, is apparently a man of some significance," Patterson continued, tone shifting in that way that indicated the conversation was about to change shape. "We're going to need a formal statement about your involvement. For the record. For liability purposes." Katie nodded. She could do that. A formal statement was just facts arranged in the right order. It was another kind of composure. Across the city, in an office on the 43rd floor of the Commerce Plaza, Dale Whitfield sat behind a desk that cost more than Katie's annual salary and pressed his cell phone against his ear with the confidence of someone who knew exactly which doors would open for him. The councilwoman, Patricia something, he'd helped her with a zoning variance 3 years ago, something about mixed-use development that had made her very grateful, answered on the second ring. "Patricia, it's Dale." I need a favor. His voice had that smooth quality of someone used to asking for things and receiving them. There's a woman, possibly unlicensed, who intervened in a medical emergency on my platform this morning. I need the Regional Transit Authority's legal team to understand the liability exposure. He paused, listening to something she said. Yes, exactly. An incident report is being filed. I'm just making sure we've got the right people aware of the situation. By the time Katie finished giving her statement to Patterson, sparse, accurate, revealing nothing about her actual operational capacity, Whitfield had already called the Regional Transit Authority, already filed a formal incident report through the station manager's system, already activated his network in ways that made sure the narrative would be the one he was pushing: reckless vigilante, seeking attention, endangering the public through unlicensed medical intervention. The incident report landed in 3 places simultaneously: the Cedar Creek Medical Administrative Files, the San Antonio Police Department's non-emergency records, and the Transit Authority's insurance carrier, where a claims adjuster named Morrison would read the words reckless vigilante seeking attention and file it into the mental category of lawsuit waiting to happen. Whitfield had learned years ago that narrative mattered more than facts. Narrative shaped what people believed, shaped what they were afraid of, shaped what they would do to protect themselves. But that wasn't the worst part of what was about to happen to Katie Rodriguez. Not even close. Because across town, in a hospital room where machines beeped their mechanical vigil and fluorescent lights hummed their fluorescent hum, Marcus Chen was waking up to a world where his heart was still beating, and somewhere in the Pentagon, a secure line was about to ring with news that would change everything that was about to follow. That night, the diner was almost empty. Katie sat in a corner booth, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and a view of the parking lot that stretched into nothing. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she didn't drink it. She stared at her reflection in the dark window instead, a ghost image overlaid on the neon signs of the strip mall across the street. Closed. All of them. The fluorescent tubes above her head buzzed with the kind of sound that made your teeth ache after midnight, a low electrical hum that filled the silence like a presence. The burner phone sat on the table beside the salt shaker, silent. Screen dark. No messages. No clearance from her handler. Not even an acknowledgement that she'd compromised the operation. 3 months. 91 days of moving through Cedar Creek Medical like a ghost, documenting supply chain discrepancies, cross-referencing pharmaceutical lot numbers, building a case against the theft ring that had connections to a black market arms network operating out of a warehouse in the Port Authority. The investigation was classified. The handler's name was classified. The targets were classified. And now it was all classified as destroyed. Because Marcus Chen had collapsed exactly 57 yards from her primary observation position. Katie's hands wrapped around the cold mug, and they didn't shake. That wasn't composure. That was muscle memory. Hands that had performed open cardiac massage through a left anterolateral thoracotomy in a mud compound in Helmand Province didn't shake over coffee. They stayed steady. They stayed useful. They stayed the only thing she could control when the world moved too fast. The boots sat beside her on the bench seat, worn leather the color of old blood. The left one was still stained. Not just stained, marked. The blood of Lieutenant James Carver, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3rd Squad, 2nd Platoon. She'd saved his life in 2019 with her hands in his chest cavity and adrenaline replacing her common sense. 23 minutes of direct compression while rounds impacted the Humvee's frame and the sand turned red and another corpsman screamed for more pressure. She'd gotten his heart beating again. His sinus rhythm had returned. His O2 sat had climbed, 72, 78, 84, 88. Perfusion restored. 3 days later, he was gone. Sepsis. The kind of infection that doesn't care how steady your hands are or how many times your compression saved someone's life. He'd pulled her aside in the medical tent at Forward Operating Base Shank, his face the color of old parchment, and made her promise something she couldn't refuse. Never stop fighting. Not for rank. Not for medals. Not for the people who understand. Fight for the ones who fall in the dark. Fight when nobody's watching. Fight when it costs you everything. She'd kept that promise for 11 years. And tonight, she'd broken her mission to keep it. Whitfield was moving fast. She could feel it the way soldiers feel incoming fire, not with her ears, but with something deeper. Something that had been trained into her bone marrow at Coronado Island during 6 months of Hell Week and everything that came after. The patterns were visible if you knew how to read them. A formal incident report filed with the Transit Authority at 4:22 p.m. A phone call to the Regional Medical Board at 5:22 p.m. An email to Cedar Creek's compliance officer at 6:15 p.m., forwarded to the hospital's legal department, copied to 3 board members whose names she recognized from the hospital directory. He was building a case. Building a narrative. Building the kind of institutional pressure that could bury a person or force them to run. She should run. That was the tactical decision. Extract from the area, contact her handler through secure channels, let the operation dissolve and regroup. The theft ring would scatter. The investigation would restart somewhere else with different personnel. That was how it worked. You sacrificed the mission sometimes. You accepted losses. But Lieutenant Carver's blood was still visible on the left boot if you knew where to look. Katie's eye stayed fixed on her reflection. The woman staring back looked hollow. Not broken, hollow. Like someone had removed the part that cared about operational security and left the rest intact. Her jaw was tight. Her shoulders squared. Her breathing steady. Classic Navy training. You didn't fall apart because the mission collapsed. You fell apart after you were safe, in private, where it couldn't compromise anyone else. She wasn't safe yet. The booth next to her had an elderly couple, husband and wife, maybe 50 years married. They weren't talking. Just sitting together, drinking decaf and watching the rain through the window the same way Katie was. The wife's hand rested on the table. Her husband's hand was next to it. Not touching. Just close enough that they both knew the other was there. Katie watched them for 3 minutes without moving. That was the kind of thing worth fighting for. The quiet moments. The presence. The choice to sit with someone in the dark and not speak because you didn't need to. She turned back to her window reflection. In her peripheral vision, she could see the boots. Boots that had walked through the poppy fields of Helmand Province. Boots that had stood in a military hospital tent while a man bled out despite everything she'd done to keep him alive. Boots that had carried her through 12 years of military service and 8 years of civilian work, each step a promise renewed. Whitfield had no idea who he was fighting. That was the only advantage she had left. He was reading a background file and seeing a nurse with 2 years at Cedar Creek Medical and a clean record. He wasn't seeing the woman who'd trained under the Navy's top combat surgeons. He wasn't seeing the operation she'd run in theater. He wasn't seeing the reason her hands moved the way they moved when someone's heart stopped. He was seeing just a nurse. That was his mistake. Katie picked up the mug and drank the cold coffee anyway. It tasted like cardboard and time. The diner clock on the wall read 2:24 a.m. Her shift at Cedar Creek started at 6:53 a.m. 14 minutes away from becoming too tired to care about the right decision, and long enough away that she could sit here in the dark and pretend she still had options. The burner phone remained silent on the table. Her handler wouldn't clear her. She knew this the way she knew things about people without them speaking, from reading the space between words, from noticing which conversations happened and which ones didn't. The operation was too important. The theft ring had connections to the kind of organizations that didn't forgive operational failure. Marcus Chen's collapse was a problem, but it was a manageable problem if handled correctly. If Katie simply disappeared into the system and let Whitfield's complaints get buried in the normal noise of institutional chaos. But Lieutenant Carver's blood was still on her boot. She reached down and touched the stain, her fingers pressing against the worn leather. Not a gesture of weakness. A gesture of confirmation. A reminder that some promises didn't live in the operational parameters of classified investigations. Some promises lived in your hands. In the muscles that remembered how to save a life. in the choices you made when nobody was watching. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights continued overhead. Outside, rain had started again, not the hammering kind, but the steady, patient kind that could last all night. Katie watched it streak down the window in patterns that looked almost like blood under the neon signs. She had no idea that across town, in a hospital room where monitors beeped their mechanical vigil, Marine General James Chen was standing at his son's bedside, looking at the medical chart and seeing the name of the woman who'd performed the resuscitation. He had no idea that somewhere in his memory, he was recognizing the name from a briefing. A name associated with operations that didn't appear in official records. A name that had appeared exactly once on a classified memorandum about medical assets embedded in domestic operations. He had no idea that he was about to change everything. But Katie was about to find out. The conference room at Cedar Creek Medical felt smaller than it should have been, the kind of space designed for routine budget meetings and quarterly reviews, not for the dissolution of a man's certainty. Katie sat with her back straight, hands folded on the laminate table, watching Station Manager Dale Whitfield arrange his papers like a general positioning troops before battle. 2 hospital lawyers flanked him, their blazers identical navy, their expressions professionally neutral. The Transit Authority's Risk Management Director occupied the 4th chair, his briefcase positioned at precise right angles to the edge of the table. Through the glass walls, she could see the hallway continuing on in fluorescent monotony, doctors passing without glancing in, unaware that the architecture of someone's career was being dismantled in real time. Whitfield cleared his throat. His tie was pressed with military precision, his shoes polished to a shine that suggested he'd been preparing for this moment all night. Miss Rodriguez, the lead lawyer began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd delivered bad news to the defenseless before. You represented yourself as medically qualified when you intervened at the train station platform yesterday. I never identified myself as anything, Katie said quietly. The words came out steady, measured, each one placed like a chess piece. I assessed an unconscious patient. I provided stabilization until EMS arrived. Whitfield leaned forward, and his voice took on the tone of a man who'd spent hours on the phone with city councilwoman representatives and transit authority board members, building his case brick by brick. You inserted yourself into an emergency response. You overrode my authority on municipal property. You created a liability exposure that could cost this transit system millions if that young man, he stopped, catching himself before he said it aloud. If that young man had died. The lead lawyer continued, her pen hovering. The incident report indicates you performed cardiac assessment without proper credentials, potentially contaminating the medical record, potentially interfering with. The glass doors burst open. 4 uniformed naval officers strode directly into the conference room, their dress blues pressed into crisp lines that seemed to bend light itself. The lead commander's eyes scanned the table in a sweep that took less than 2 seconds. His gaze locked on Katie. We're looking for Nightingale. The security guard who'd opened the door, a former army sergeant with a limp that came from somewhere hot and foreign, somewhere he didn't talk about, snapped to attention when he saw the naval insignia. His weathered face went hard, muscles memory overriding 30 years of civilian time. He pointed directly at Katie, his voice sharp and clear. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, you have visitors. The room fell into stunned silence. Not the normal silence of a pause in conversation, but the kind of silence that carries weight, that presses down on the air like altitude. Whitfield's mouth opened. Closed. The lawyer's pen stopped moving mid-word. The risk management director's hand froze on his briefcase. Katie's expression didn't change. She was a stone. She was a wall. She was a woman who'd been trained to absorb information and respond only to what mattered. The lead naval officer stepped aside. Marine General James Chen entered the room, and the space seemed to acknowledge his presence before anyone's conscious mind registered it. Dress blues immaculate. 4 stars gleaming at his shoulders like captured starlight. He was a man whose voice had commanded warriors, whose decisions had rippled across battlefields, whose authority was not granted by position but by something older, something carved into bone. He looked directly at Katie. My son is alive. 10 seconds of absolute silence. Nothing moved. The fluorescent lights hummed their constant drone. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped in rhythmic proof of human continuation. Marcus Chen is alive, General Chen continued, his voice low and precise, because the Navy's most decorated surgical specialist happened to be standing on that platform yesterday. He paused, letting the statement settle into the room like sediment in water. A woman who performed battlefield saves in Helm and Province that are still classified. Whitfield's face drained of color. The lawyer's eyes widened slightly, a crack in her professional composure. A combat medic, General Chen said, who turned down a teaching post at Bethesda Naval Medical Center to run undercover operations. He nodded to the lead naval officer, Commander Price. Price placed a tablet on the conference table, screen facing Whitfield. What filled that screen was surveillance footage, real-time, aerial angle, showing the interior of Whitfield's office. FBI agents in windbreakers moved through the space with the methodical precision of people taking apart a life. Filing cabinets opened. Computers seized. A box labeled evidence filled with documents that Whitfield had spent hours crafting, arranging, weaponizing. Mr. Whitfield, Price said, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority, you are currently under investigation for evidence tampering and document falsification. The incident report you altered last night? The witness statement you fabricated? Federal crimes. Katie sat perfectly still. Her hands remained folded on the table. Her breathing didn't change. But her eyes moved, tracking from the general to the screen to Whitfield's expression as it collapsed in real time, watching a man recognize that he'd been outmaneuvered at every level by forces he'd never seen coming. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the general began. Station Manager Whitfield, Price said, stepping forward, you threatened to have Master Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez arrested yesterday for practicing medicine without a license. First layer. Whitfield's chair scraped backward, a sound like nails against old wood. The Army Ranger entered the conference room, still wearing his faded jacket with the 75th Ranger Regiment patch visible above the chest pocket. His name was Mitchell, and his eyes held the clarity of someone who looked at death and refused to blink. I served with the 75th Ranger Regiment, he said, his voice steady as a sniper's breathing. I watched Master Chief Rodriguez perform a direct cardiac massage through an open chest cavity under enemy fire in Helm and Province, 2019. She was rotating compressions with our unit medic, maintaining sinus rhythm while rounds impacted the wall around us. She saved my team leader's life on that roadside, and I watched her do it with the kind of precision that most people only achieve in textbooks. Second layer. The lawyer's pen fell from her hand, clattering against the table. General Chen opened a second tablet, began reading information that glowed with the weight of classified databases. Master Chief Rodriguez has 17 confirmed combat saves. 3 Navy Crosses. 2 Bronze Stars with Valor device. Advanced trauma certifications that 95% of civilian surgeons will never achieve. He looked up, directly at Whitfield. Her call sign is Nightingale. She was embedded at Cedar Creek Medical for 3 months as part of a joint DEA-FBI operation tracking black market medical supply theft with ties to international arms trafficking. Third layer. The risk management director stood up slowly, backing toward the door as if distance might inoculate him from what was happening. Price continued, his voice matter-of-fact, delivered like facts in a briefing rather than revelations that restructured reality. Master Chief Rodriguez compromised that operation yesterday. She blew 3 months of deep cover work because she will not watch someone die when she has the skill to intervene, regardless of mission parameters. That's not a liability issue, Mr. Whitfield. That's called integrity. Fourth layer. The fluorescent lights buzzed, and in that buzz was the sound of institutional failure, of a man learning that the system he'd built to protect himself had been watching him the entire time. General Chen's voice dropped lower, acquiring a tone that suggested personal weight behind the official words. My son coded in that ambulance. His heart stopped. The rhythm strip went flatline. Master Chief Rodriguez kept him alive with compressions for 11 minutes straight. The paramedic on scene reported she never missed a beat, never broke rhythm, never showed fatigue despite the physical demand of maintaining proper compression depth and rate while the ambulance accelerated and cornered. He paused. 11 minutes. That's the difference between a 17-year-old Marine with a future and a flag-folded triangle at a memorial service. Fifth layer. The lawyer who'd been speaking before now stared at her hands as if she no longer recognized them. Ranger Mitchell's voice cracked slightly, the only moment where emotion breached his composure. Lieutenant Carver, the man she saved in Helmand, he died 3 days later from complications we couldn't have prevented. Before he died, he made her promise to never stop fighting, to never let someone die if she had the power to save them. She's been keeping that promise for 11 years. Sixth layer, the personal sacrifice made visible. Katie's jaw tightened. Just barely. Just enough that someone trained to read micro-expressions would have caught it. That was the only reaction anyone would ever see from her. No tears. No triumph. No relief. Just the faint compression of muscle that suggested the weight of promises kept in blood and commitment. Whitfield stared at the tablet screen, watching agents box up the artifacts of his campaign, watching his leverage dissolve into cardboard and chain of custody forms. The silence stretched for 10 full seconds, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rhythm of hospital monitors registering the continuation of lives that had been saved, that would keep being saved, regardless of what bureaucrats decided about credentials and authority. General Chen stood. The naval officers stood. Mitchell stood. In the standing was a kind of judgment, the way a courtroom full of people rises when a verdict reaches conclusion. "You'll want to call your attorney, Mr. Whitfield," Price said quietly, "before the field agents finish with your office." They turned, together, a unit moving with practiced synchronization. As they reached the door, General Chen looked back at Katie one final time. Not a nod. Not a salute. Just a look that acknowledged everything she'd sacrificed, everything she'd never be able to claim in public, everything she'd given up to keep a promise made in a desert 11 years ago. The door closed behind them with the soft whisper of hinges moving through air, leaving Whitfield and his lawyers and his transit authority colleague in a room that suddenly felt very small, very quiet, and very much like the beginning of the end of something that should never have started. Katie folded her hands on the table and waited, breathing steady as a pilot's, for whatever came next. The commander placed the tablet on the conference room table with the precision of a surgeon setting down an instrument. Real-time surveillance footage filled the screen, grainy security camera angles of Dale Whitfield's Transit Authority office, where 3 FBI agents in blue windbreakers moved through filing cabinets with methodical purpose. One agent held up a manila folder, nodded to the camera, and bagged it. Then another. Then a laptop, sealed in evidence paper with the careful attention of people who understood chain of custody. The footage was live. It was happening right now, 32 blocks away, while Whitfield sat in this room pretending he still had a future. "What is this?" Whitfield's voice came out thin, reedy. "What are you showing me?" The commander didn't answer. He tapped the screen and the footage jumped to security camera angles of Whitfield's desk. An agent's gloved hand held up a handwritten document, Katie's incident report, the one filed at Cedar Creek Medical, marked as altered in red pen. Then another document appeared on screen. Then another. Witness statements with Whitfield's handwriting visible in the margins, changing dates, changing times, changing the account of what happened on that platform. 8 months of systematic falsification. 8 months of evidence tampering so meticulous, so deliberate, that it had triggered a federal investigation the moment the first red flag appeared to the Bureau. "You altered the incident report." General Chen's voice was ice water poured down a drain. "You forged witness statements." Whitfield's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again like a fish pulled from water, gasping at air it was never meant to breathe. His hands shook. His hands actually shook, the first involuntary movement anyone had seen from him, and it came too late to matter. "I was protecting the station's liability exposure," he whispered. "The incident report made us look negligent if an unlicensed person was performing medical intervention without authorization." "You were obstructing a federal investigation," the lead naval officer said. "Not a question." A statement of fact, hollow as a judge's gavel. Falsifying federal documents. Tampering with evidence. The door to the conference room opened without a knock. 2 FBI agents entered, their field jackets bearing the gold seal, their faces wearing the particular exhaustion of people who had spent 8 months watching a small man dig himself into a hole that was now a crater. One of them was a woman with eyes the color of deep water, and when she looked at Whitfield, he understood that everything he had done, every call he had made, every official he had contacted, every document he had altered, had been watched, recorded, catalogued by people whose job was to know when small men became criminals. "Dale Whitfield," she said. He nodded. His expensive Transit Authority blazer suddenly looked like a costume, cheap polyester pretending to be authority. "You're under arrest for falsifying official documents, evidence tampering, and obstruction of a federal investigation." She read him his rights in a voice that had done this 1,000 times before, would do it 1,000 times again, and the words fell into the room like stones into still water. Each one landed with the weight of consequence. Each one rippled outward into a future where Dale Whitfield no longer had a badge, no longer had a network, no longer had anything except the handcuffs that the male agent was now placing around his wrists with the kind of clinical efficiency that suggested this was the inevitable conclusion to a story that had been written months ago. Whitfield didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just sat there while the FBI agents read him his rights and explained the federal charges and outlined the evidence that had been accumulating against him like snow in a winter that never ended. The city councilwoman he had called, she was cooperating fully, had already given a statement confirming that Whitfield had asked her to pressure Cedar Creek Medical into distancing itself from Katie Rodriguez. The Transit Authority's legal team had already released a statement condemning his actions. The director of the Transit Authority had already ordered an independent audit of his office spanning the last 3 years. Everything that Dale Whitfield had built, his reputation, his authority, his network of favors and professional relationships, had been dismantled by people who understood that there were consequences for lying to federal investigators. They led him out. The click of the handcuffs, the shuffle of his feet on tile, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the metal in a way that made everything look cold and temporary. Katie watched him go without moving. Her hands remained folded on the table. Her breathing remained steady. But something in her eyes, something that had been locked away since that platform, since she chose a life over a mission, had finally been released. The silence in the conference room stretched like a rubber band pulled to its limit. General Chen looked at Katie. She looked back. In that moment of mutual regard, something passed between them that needed no words. The Navy understood sacrifice. The Navy understood people who chose living over policy, who broke protocol to save a life, who would carry the weight of that choice forever because that was what warriors did. That was who they were. 6 weeks later, Dale Whitfield sat behind a folding table outside a strip mall on the edge of San Antonio, where the asphalt shimmered in the Texas heat and the air tasted like exhaust and desperation. His polyester short-sleeved shirt, the kind sold in bulk at discount uniform suppliers, was already dampening with sweat at the collar and armpits. Laminated insurance brochures were arranged in neat rows in front of him, each one promising protection against life's uncertainties. He reached for one, straightened it 1/8 of an inch, set it back down. His hands weren't shaking anymore. They were just tired. A man walked past, someone from the Transit Authority, someone who had worked 2 floors above his office. Their eyes met for one fraction of a second. The man's gaze slid away, deliberate as a knife, and he kept walking without breaking stride. This had become the pattern. Former colleagues, former friends, people who had once invited him to happy hours and asked his advice on administrative problems, they all walked past now as if he had become invisible. The federal charges had been reduced to misdemeanors in a plea deal negotiated by lawyers he could no longer afford. No prison time, which was supposed to be a mercy. But his career was ash. His pension was gone pending investigation. His wife had stopped answering his calls after the 2nd week. He picked up another brochure. Set it down. Watch the parking lot. The sun climbed higher. Meanwhile, Katie Rodriguez stood on the deck of a naval vessel cutting through the Gulf of Mexico, her boots planted wide against the roll of the ocean, binoculars raised to the horizon where water met sky in a line so clean it looked like it had been drawn by a ruler. The salt spray misted her face. The wind that pushed across the deck smelled like diesel and brine and the particular emptiness that only existed at sea. Her next assignment was embedded medical officer for a joint task force interdiction operation running out of Naval Station Corpus Christi. 3 months minimum. Possibly longer. Behind her, a young corpsman moved with careful precision, polishing a pair of worn combat boots. The leather was scarred and stained, blood that had dried years ago, sand that had worked into the seams, the particular patina that only came from walking through places where people died. The boots sat in a glass case in the ship's medical bay, protected like a religious artifact. Beneath them, a brass plaque read, Lieutenant Carver, Helmand Province, 2019, some promises outlast the people who make them. The boots belonged to a lieutenant who had died 3 days after Katie pulled him out of a blown Humvee. She had carried them for 11 years. Now they would travel the oceans. Marcus Chen had returned to graduate school at the University of Texas, fully recovered, his cardiac function restored to normal limits by Cedar Creek Medical's cardiothoracic team. He sent her a message every week through a secure channel, nothing important, just brief updates about his classes, his recovery, his life continuing on the trajectory it had been following before a collapsed heart interrupted his Saturday afternoon. She never answered. She always read them. That was the contract she had made with herself, acknowledgement without engagement. He lived because she chose to break protocol. The universe was balanced. General James Chen had returned to his posting at Camp Lejeune and had immediately nominated her for a Commendation, Navy Cross recommendation, the works. She had declined it through official channels. The letter of refusal was brief, I did my job, sir. Nothing more. What she didn't say was that she had chosen a life over a mission, and some choices didn't deserve medals. Some choices were just what you did because letting someone die would have broken something inside you that no future mission could ever repair. The Army Ranger veteran from the train station platform had tracked her down through military channels, the kind of network that existed in the spaces between official records. He had found her secure email and sent a single message, thank you for pulling my team leader out of that Humvee. Thank you for trying. She had responded with 2 words, thank Carver. That was the truth. That was always the truth. The boots in the glass case were more than memory. They were debt. In the San Antonio train station, commuters flowed across the platform where Marcus Chen had collapsed 7 weeks ago, where Katie Rodriguez had knelt in the dirt and diesel smell and made a choice that cost her 3 months of undercover work, compromised a federal investigation, and saved a life. None of them knew what had happened there. None of them saw the faint scuff marks where her knees had pressed into the concrete. The platform looked like any other platform, people moving through, moving on, moving toward destinations that mattered to them in ways they understood. Katie stood at the rail and looked toward the horizon where the water became infinite. Her binoculars hung at her chest. Her boots were planted like roots. And behind her, in a glass case in a medical bay that moved through the Gulf, 2 worn combat boots sat in permanent testimony to a promise that would outlast the person who had made it. This is where Katie Rodriguez lived now. Not in hospitals. Not in conference rooms. But in the spaces between mission and mercy, in the places where warrior and healer were the same person, in the particular loneliness that came from choosing right when right was going to cost you everything. Some promises outlast the people who make them. True heroism is what you do when the world stops watching. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced the impossible choice between duty and doing what's right, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories of hidden strength and invisible warriors. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to know that real power doesn't always wear a uniform. Thanks for watching.